you both had a hearing with Secretary Hegseth just 2 weeks ago. Since then, we've seen the launch of Project Freedom, the pause of Project Freedom. We've seen some hostilities resume. We've had the president say that the war is over, but that it may resume. From the administration, do you feel a level of comfort with where operations are at this point?
Well, first off, I think this conflict is ongoing, and anything that is ongoing is very difficult for any sharing of information, both either publicly or in a classified setting with Congress. And in the Armed Services Committee, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee and certainly the ranking member have been very clear that no one is satisfied with the level of information that has been being shared with Congress, both either in terms of strategy or ongoing operations. And Mike Rogers, the chairman of the committee, has very publicly stated that on a number of levels, including the conflict that is ongoing, that the department needs to be more forthcoming in sharing of information. I think what's important also is that the administration has been very clear that the conflict is about ensuring that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, and that is the crux of all aspects of the ongoing and current negotiations. And as we've seen in the basis of the negotiations, Iran has refused to make that commitment. And I think that is I think, very revealing as this conflict has begun until where we are now. Those who've wished to have said, oh, but Iran wasn't pursuing nuclear capabilities. Iran has been adamant that they are not going to make a declaration, that they are not going to pursue nuclear capabilities. That's the crux of these negotiations. That's the crux of their unwillingness to conclude them. And that's where we are currently.
Congressman Smith, I know you expressed concern at the hearing 2 weeks ago about where things stand and the lack of an end game. Has anything changed in the last 2 weeks to give you more confidence that there is a plan to end this war?
No, I mean, look, I think it's really important to understand exactly what happened here. Certainly nuclear weapons are part of it, but that's not why President Trump started this war. They were engaged in negotiations at that point. Iran's nuclear program had been set back. There were other paths to stopping Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. The reason this war started is because President Trump thought that a 4 to 5 week bombing campaign could basically break the Iranian regime, one way or the other. Either the regime would collapse and you'd have new people there, or they would capitulate to all of Trump's demands because they would have been broken. That didn't work. And by the way, every single expert worth listening to said that it wouldn't work. So that was plan A. Plan B was the blockade, that the blockade would break Iran. And that's not working either for a variety of different reasons, not the least of which is that Russia and China have interest in helping Iran survive that. So now we are stuck. And plan C was for Trump to just keep saying that the war was over and Iran has agreed to everything we asked them to, as if he could just make it up and then make it so. That too didn't work. So now we're in a horrible position. Iran has done something that they had not done prior to the war, and that is weaponize the Strait of Hormuz. They felt like they had the space to do that given the war that was launched against them. So now we don't have a particularly good option for forcing Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The best option on the table is to actually work with the rest of the world. There's some 50 countries that the UK and France have led in an effort to try to negotiate to get the strait back open. Trump has pushed them all away, rejected them, and insisted that we're going to do this alone. Now, there's no path forward for making that happen. The war was a horrific decision that put us in an incredibly weak position. And basically, I associate myself with the remarks of Robert Kagan in The Atlantic yesterday about where this has left us. And President Trump has absolutely no idea how to get out of it, no inclination to engage in realistic diplomacy. So we're stuck in a very bad place right now, and I am deeply worried about the impact that it's going to have on U.S. standing in the world, on the Middle East, on the global economy. And it is very clear that the president has absolutely no idea where to go from here, except, I guess, to keep crossing his fingers and hoping that Iran just gives in.
On that issue of the allies, Congressman Turner, you brought up allies during that Armed Services hearing a couple weeks back and the importance of sending the right message to allies. So could you talk about why you felt the need to put that out there, and do you feel like this administration is sending the right message to NATO, is sending the right message to our foreign partners?
Well, and this administration is working with our NATO allies in a way that is constructive in strengthening what in the end will be the NATO capabilities. In the first Trump administration, the Trump administration worked with our NATO allies in order for them to realize, for really the first time, their Wales commitment of 2% of domestic budgetary expenditures that represents their commitment that they had made at the Wales NATO summit to their own domestic defense spending. In this administration, they unbelievably got our NATO allies to commit to a 5% of domestic spending that's going to translate into significant European overall capabilities. Significant spending both in production of weapon systems, but also capabilities that'll translate right to overall Western and NATO capabilities. Now, that did not occur without a significant amount of both diplomacy and coordination. Now, the issue that I raise, which I think is an important one, is the coordination with our allies of leadership. The problem that we have right now, as you look to the political nature and winds that are happening in Europe, is a lot of our allies are having their own political problems within their own domestic political scenes. Great Britain is having, the UK is having, their own problems with their prime minister, whether or not the prime minister will survive. In Germany, the chancellor has the lowest polling numbers of any chancellor in modern times, where they're trying to have a discussion there as to what's going to happen in their overall in their government. They're struggling themselves even to have relationships among our European allies as we're trying to pull them together to coalesce to lead. Now then also we have this issue of trying to get their assistance for the Straits of Hormuz and having some cohesive policy coming out of our NATO allies and our European partners with Iran.
But with those positives that you mentioned there, shouldn't the message from the administration then be praising those changes and trying to build on them rather than what we've seen out of the White House, which has been...
If I might, if I could...
But they have praised them, and they've certainly been praised those accomplishments. What they haven't done is said, okay, that's great, you don't have to do anything else but make a promise. You have to do more than just make a promise. You have to actually achieve them, and in achieving them at the same time, you have to have that translating into actually capabilities and
sorry,
actual commitment.
I got to get in here. Let's return to actually what's happening. I mean, first of all, the degree to which NATO agreed to spend more money on defense, it had a lot more to do with Russia invading Ukraine than anything that Trump did or did not do.
Well, that's not true. They had invaded Ukraine
Sorry,
a long time before, and they had made no commitment.
I have an enormous amount of
respect for you. They had made no commitment.
You've had your chance.
They had made no commitment until the Trump administration came with an actual number and said, this is what we're going to spend.
I guess if I was a Trump supporter, I wouldn't let anyone else talk either.
You actually interrupted me.
Well, because you were going for 4 minutes there, all right? So we have alienated our allies repeatedly, bringing people into the Oval Office and humiliating them, insulting them, threatening to invade Greenland, threatening to use U.S. military force against a NATO ally, acting like Canada should be annexed and become the 51st state, saying that we are now going to annex Venezuela. I want everyone to understand something. The United States of America under Donald Trump is no longer the leader of the free world. And the rest of the world knows that, even if we continue to pretend otherwise. And they're making plans to try to be with anyone else in the world that can reduce their dependence upon the U.S. Because President Trump has made it clear that he will humiliate, coerce, insult, and use violence against anyone who doesn't agree with him. And the rest of the world is frightened about that. They want the U.S. as a partner, but they see a president who doesn't see us as a partner for the rest of the world. He is insulting NATO day in and day out. As I pointed out in the hearing, NATO is a defensive alliance. That means that if you are attacked, you must be defended. It does not mean that if any country within NATO decides to unilaterally start a war without consulting you, that everybody else is obligated to join. That's what Trump did. And then having done that, rather than saying, I did this on my own, I got this, he started berating and insulting our allies for not helping him with something that he couldn't accomplish himself. Please, the tone that the president uses, the words that he uses, the actions that he's taken are undermining an 80-year system of partnerships and alliances. We are in that era of America alone, because that's what President Trump says over and over and over again. And we need that to stop. We need to bring our allies back in, and that is not what he is doing. Whatever may have happened or didn't happen with NATO, okay, I'll give him a little bit of credit for having browbeat them into spending more money. But the way he is acting, that we are not a democratic free society, that we are a country that is simply going to take over whatever country we want, even amongst our allies, to act like that doesn't have an impact on the way the rest of the world begins to resort their idea of who they should be allied with, is naive, doesn't even begin to describe that outlook.
That's a nice little quote, but the reality is there's absolutely nothing that the United States has accomplished with Iran, including Midnight Hammer, including this operation, that we have done alone. And every operation has been done with our allies and has required our allies. And it has been done with their cooperation as the United States leading. Now, there have been things that we've wanted allies to do that they have not done. And the president, in the president's own style, which is the same style that he has had his entire time in both his first term and his second term, which I know you've been a great fan of, but it remains his style. But nonetheless, none of the things that he has been doing could have been accomplished without our allies participating.
But isn't there, with that style, as you say, isn't that a very confrontational way to approach this? Now the president is talking about removing more troops from Germany. There's the initial 5,000, which maybe they're getting moved around, but he has said he wants to draw it down much further. Isn't there the danger of alienating those allies by pushing so far? Or are you confident that really they are just seeing this as bluster out of the American president, and they're going to still feel confident that America is a steady ally?
Well, I mean, there's always danger, right? I mean, there's always danger in someone being alienated. There's also danger in the rhetoric from allies themselves. I mean, I do think that when you look at the discourse that's occurring, I mean, I think our allies also should look at their own discourse. I mean, I do think that there is a reason why the German chancellor's own polls have him the lowest that there has been of a chancellor. There are political problems within Germany right now. And so this is not an issue of just, what's happening with Donald Trump. It's not like the whole rest of the world is having great political stability. And there's an issue between the United States and all of our allies. There currently is great political turmoil in Europe, and that turmoil is also, inter and intra-Europe. So you can't cast it as an issue of what is this overall dialogue and tone that's happening, because it's happening amongst Europe itself. But I think what is important is overall trends. Taking out the rhetoric, taking out the dialogue, look at the overall trend and the overall policy of goals and objectives. The overall policy goals and objectives are the same that every administration's tried to achieve, and that is a stronger Europe, a stronger NATO, a Middle East that includes an Iran that is not nuclear and that doesn't threaten the region, and that also doesn't have a terrorist organization and structure within which it threatens Israel, our ally, and our other allies in the region.
Congressman Smith, is there anything that can be done in NDAA, which is coming up, to deal with this issue of the allies? We've seen in the past there's been language inserted in there about withdrawing troops from Europe, withdrawing troops from the Pacific. Is there any bipartisan output?
Well, yes, and we've done it. We did it before, and I will say there's bipartisan support in Congress for support for NATO. We've put language in there. In fact, we have language that makes what Trump just did with the 5,000 troops in Germany illegal. But another feature of not being the leader of the free world is the law doesn't really matter to you. It's not legal. We passed it, bipartisan, very strong bill. Trump just completely ignored it, as he's ignored a whole bunch of other things. Now, I think it's worth it for us to do that again. I think it's worth it for there to be a bipartisan, bicameral statement about how important our allies and partners are. But at the end of the day, the rest of the world sees Donald Trump. You know, Mike and I are reasonably important. They don't see us, okay? At least not very often. They see Trump. And what he says and he does has a much more profound impact on our system of partnerships and alliances. And I'm sorry, we keep acting like, you know, Trump bringing Zelensky into the Oval Office and berating him and insulting him and belittling him, telling him he doesn't have any cards to play. Trump saying that he's going to use force in Greenland. We all act like the rest of the world is supposed to just understand. Now, that's just the way he talks, you know? I mean, we may have decided, we may have become just numb to that, but it is devastating. And now President Trump is about to go negotiate with President Xi. And one of our three greatest strengths against China is our system of partnerships and alliance. And Xi sees that fracturing because of the way Trump is talking. And yes, our allies helped us in the sense they let us use overflight and do a bunch of different things. They were not with us on the war in Iran. Now, they, to varying degrees, tried not to stop us. Some of them did. I mean, some said, no, you can't do that. Even the UK initially didn't allow us to take flights out of the UK during the course of this, and then agreed. That's not the same as having a partnership and alliance where you are together. And if President Trump wants partners, if the Republican Party wants partners, you got to stop insulting them, belittling them. I mean, in the middle of the war, President Trump insulted President Macron and his wife just for kicks, I guess. I mean, that is not fundamentally the actions of someone who is serious about being a leader in this world.
So let's note here for a second, by the way, he said didn't allow us, because we talk about allies, didn't allow us, comma, very softly, to some extent, fly out of their countries.
Actually, the tone of my voice didn't change at all.
A lot of it's classified as to where we're flying out of, comma, to some extent. Because obviously we were flying out of these countries, comma, to some extent. To some extent. But, you know, when you take this bushel basket of complaints, remember outcomes. Again, back to take the rhetoric, throw it over here.
Yeah, the outcomes in Iran are spectacular right now.
So you look at the issue of Greenland, for example. You know, in Greenland, with the Greenland issue, I mean, the headlines right now say that there's a deal being negotiated with respect to new bases in Greenland. There was a meeting with the NATO allies, with the Secretary General of NATO, from which Trump said, I'm not going to do that. Everything that you claim that he was threatening and that he said he was going to do, he said he was going to do, that he said, I'm not going to do. And then now the headlines are that there's a deal. So where you're saying, you know, there's a huge permanent fissure.
Can I ask you a sincere question?
A huge permanent fissure. Let me finish the sentence. A huge permanent fissure. We're going to have to wait and see what these headlines are that are like actually today.
Can I ask you a
about?
sincere
Hold on. Let me finish the sentence. Where the headlines are today that there's a deal coming. So we'll have to see what that deal is.
So you don't think that Trump threatening military force against Greenland, and by the way, the deal that you're talking about, if we had just gone to Denmark straight up and said, we want to do more military bases there without all the threats and all that we're going to invade and it should be the 51st state and blah, 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 they would have agreed to it in the first place. Do you honestly think that Trump threatening the use of U.S. military force against a NATO partner did no lasting damage to the alliance?
Adam, I get that you don't like Donald Trump, but I don't think why we're having a national security conversation about whether or not. I don't think that we're having a national security conversation about whether or not you don't like Donald Trump.
Yeah, no, we're not. You're just not answering the question.
I get this.
I don't care whether I like Donald Trump or not. Can you answer the question? Do you not think that him doing that?
The issue shouldn't be whether or not you like Donald Trump's style or not. The issue should be what's important about what we're trying to achieve.
Sure, but you
what
want to address that issue.
What are we trying to achieve?
We're trying to achieve
a not nuclear Iran. Right.
So
we're trying to achieve.
So you won't address the issue.
I did just address the issue. You don't like Donald Trump. I get it.
Right. Gentlemen, I appreciate it. We could do this all afternoon. Unfortunately, I've got the blinking clock here. Would love to keep you, but thank you both for the time, and we'll see more of this in the hearing.
Thank you. Thanks.